So I recently sat down with my friend, Aimee Gallo. She is a functional nutritionist with over 20 years experience working in the nutrition field, plus 30 years of studying nutrition. We originally sat down to talk just about nuances in the nutrition field, and it just morphed into this wonderful conversation that you're really just not going to want to miss. So tune in. Are you ready to forget the fads, diet dogma, and go beyond the calorie? You know deep down there's gotta be a better way. Welcome to Holistic Health Made Simple, where ancient wisdom and science collide. I'm Jolene, your nutritional therapy practitioner, and I'm here to empower you to think outside the box and finally get healthy. Together, we'll dive into the power of the gut, metabolism, and your overall health. No more yo-yo dieting, no more quick fixes, and no more confusing advice. Just simple, practical, and personalized steps that will help you reach your goals and feel amazing. Are you ready to reclaim your health? Grab some water and let's go! Hey, everybody. I am so excited to have my friend Aimee here. And today we are going to talk all about diet and nuances and why it's so important to not follow the rules, basically. And how important those nuances is. But before we get into it, I would love Aimee to tell us a little bit about herself and how she does what she does, like how she got into it and what she does.
Okay.
Welcome, Aimee.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited for this conversation. I started studying nutrition when I was about 12 years old, and I was one of those kids in the 90s who became a radical vegetarian animal rights activist. And I had some family members that were concerned about me eliminating meat from my diet when I decided to go vegetarian. They specifically were concerned about my protein intake and my iron. And, at that point I was 13, and my 13-year-old logic was, well, there's millions of people in India who are vegetarian and they're fine, so this has to be fine. So I went to the local library and I looked up vegetarian nutrition books and fell into this rabbit hole of discovery that what we eat actually has an impact on our health. And this was never a conversation that occurred in my household. Food is food. Food is what you eat when you're hungry. Some people like certain foods, some people don't like certain foods. And that was kind of the extent of it. So to understand that what we put on our plate has an impact on the quality and the quantity of our lifespan completely blew my mind at 13 years old. And so I started devouring everything I could about nutrition, vegetarian nutrition specifically, because that was my bias. And I was convinced that was the key to saving the world. And by the time I was 15, I decided that I wanted to pursue this as a career. And I've been really, really lucky. I'm one of the few people I know who went through college pursuing their passion, emerged from it, still passionate about that topic, and got to create a career doing so. And so I've studied nutrition for 30 years now. I've been in practice as a health coach before that was a word, because I decided I did not want to become a registered dietitian. I did not want to work in the hospital system. And when I emerged from undergrad and chose not to pursue the registered dietetics tract, I was basically told no one's going to respect you. You're never going to get a job anywhere. That's what the school told me, my advisors, except for one teacher who said, you have zero scope of practice. So don't be stupid and don't get yourself in trouble, but you have no scope of practice. So there's no rules for you.
Wow. Nowadays, we
Yeah.
have tons of scope of practice all of a sudden.
Well, I mean, yes,
To an
to
extent.
an extent. Yeah. At that, but at that point you were either a registered dietitian or you were nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And my running coach was he was like, hey, do you want to coach? Do you want to do nutrition work with my runners when you finish school? And I was like, absolutely, that would be great. So I was able to start my practice immediately after receiving my undergrad. And I called myself a nutrition coach because, again, there were no labels for us at that point in time. And I've been in practice ever since. After about, let's see, 14 years, I finished, after about 10 years, I went back and got my master's degree. And so now I have 2 degrees in nutrition, and I've got street cred as far as licensure goes in a
Oh
couple of
yeah.
states. But um, yeah, I still love the topic. I'm still totally passionate about it. And I see clients privately. And I also have a podcast called Blasphemous Nutrition where I discuss nuance on a regular basis and get a little feisty about it.
Oh yeah. Well, I am excited to have you here. And I love your story because yeah, I get it. A lot of us in this space had some sort of health crisis that or something happened that developed the passion.
Hmm.
I was one of those that was always like, yeah, I went into fashion, but I had a nutrition knowledge from that because of my undergrad. For whatever reason, the college I went to, my undergrad was together with fashion. So I had to take enough of those to actually get my degree. Because you know how that all works. So I'm like, okay, but you know, so I find it interesting that you just kept going and going. And it's like some of us just always had it sprinkled in, or some people knew nothing at all.
Yeah,
Um, and that's where the nuances are important because there's people in I don't really like to say it's good or bad, but there are certain people who found or had a health crisis and found a way that got them out of that health crisis. And they swear that that's the only way to live.
right.
It's the only, like, I mean, I started this last set because this is my third time down this health journey path. So the last time I started on a ketogenic diet. And at first I was like, okay, this makes sense. But I understood some of the nuances shortly thereafter, within a few months. At the beginning, I did not understand any of it. But then there was all these dogmatic zealots like
Yeah,
and I still think a ketogenic diet can be a great therapeutic approach, and some people need it and some people don't, but it's not the end all be all.
right.
But I'm not here to bash, we're not here to bash the ketogenic diet. It's about the nuances that people don't let in. You've got influencers now changing their mind. I mean,
Yes. That
so
which is exciting to see that people can change their mind.
mhm,
Um,
exactly.
that gives me hope. It gives me hope that people are willing to change their perspective or adjust their perspective over time. And because I've been kind of entrenched in this field for so long, I've seen so many things. Like what we're currently emerging from now is really the third iteration of low carb versus vegetarian. The
Mhm,
first time this happened, to my knowledge, the first time this happened was in the late 60s, early
mhm,
70s. We had this environmental vegetarian movement that emerged from hippie culture. And in the early 70s was the first time that Robert Adkins published a book on low carb diets. And so there was that friction then, and it went away. And we had, nasty ass low carb, low
low
fat,
fat. Oh,
low fat
Stackwell's.
Snackwells, right?
Mm-mm.
And in the late 90s, in the mid to late 90s, again, we had this resurgence of vegetarianism, animal rights advocacy, coinciding with the republication of Adkins' book, The Atkins Diet Revolution. And so the 90s, early 2000s was again this friction, this repeat of what we saw in the 70s. That was when I came into the field, and I
Mhm.
did not realize that what I was living through was recycling of the 1970s until about 10 years ago when it showed up for a third time. And it's really interesting because these food culture wars are very closely tied with fashion, now that you mention it.
Mhm. They are.
When keto came up with this resurgence of what we're now calling plant-based living, which incidentally has many of the same arguments that were being thrown at us in the 90s, um, the vintage sort of long flowy granny dresses, Doc Martens, collared necklaces were in fashion, as they have been in fashion recently,
Hmm.
as they were in fashion, at least the flowy,
Yeah.
dresses, floral dresses in the 1970s. So there's an element with our pop culture as it relates to nutrition, very much following the once a generation trends of fashion and, recycling movies from our childhood, all of that stuff.
Wow.
Big it's just this big churning of regurgitation that I'm seeing over and over again. And, if I'm blessed to live long enough in 20 or 30 years, we
We'll
will see
see
it
it
again.
again.
We'll
We
see it
will see
again.
it again. And I
Mark my
didn't
words.
realize it because we have recycled it over and over and over again. And
Yep.
it's yeah, it's amazing how the trends recycle. And I'm sure that some of it has recycled prior.
Yeah.
Um, it's just we didn't as it wasn't as pronounced. And I think their cycles get closer and closer. So you might not have to wait very long to see it all over again.
I
Uh,
hope I get to wait long because I'm already bored of it the second
I
time
know.
around. It's
I'm
like,
like,
come on,
wait,
people,
I
where's your
got rid of all
imagination?
those clothes and I got to start all over again. But then the nuances, like even with what we call plant-based now, people will say they're plant-based, but when we look at it, there's nuances even within that.
Right,
Um,
right.
you
There
know,
is room right now, yes, for what we would have called flexitarian or semi-vegetarian in the
mhm.
90s, where, a plant-based diet isn't as it's not as dogmatic as it was before about avoiding all animal products or avoiding all meat and seafood. I think some of that this time around may be in part because we did get so extreme in the 80s and 90s with pushing fat as low as it could possibly go, with pushing ideal body type, the whole Kate Moss heroin chic nonsense,
Mhm.
right? That we went so extreme that people don't have a palate now for that level of dogma, with perhaps regards to plant-based, environmental-based eating specifically. I mean, I definitely see extreme dogma peppered in the field in
Oh
many
yeah.
ways. But as far as anything that is going to break through into the mainstream, as plant-based living has done, I don't think by and large many of us are willing to swallow that bitter pill again.
Well, that's a good thing because I think the when we pushed the fat really low, it made a lot of people sick.
Absolutely.
And the whole culture of diets, which I don't think either one of us love. It I like diet in the term of it's the way you eat. It's what
Right.
you eat, not in the form of what I'm a like I bugs me when people are like their identity is tied to the way they eat. Um
Yeah.
you are more of a person than that. Like I get it, you like to eat vegan or you're keto or paleo, but that's not your identity. That's just food on a plate.
For
And
some people, it is their identity, though, particularly for those I think who've had that significant transformation. It is like we also have this entanglement in at least American culture of our food and what we eat and what we choose to eat, having almost a religious aroma to a religious, like there's this just this subtle underpinning
Mhm.
of religiosity. And it doesn't surprise me at all that people will like say I am keto and or I am paleo or what have you, and strongly identify that with that as it as though it were a religious belief, particularly if they have had that health transformation from doing that, right? It's like being born again.
Yeah.
You are a walking testimony of how this works, and you want to spread the good word, and you want others to be reborn as you have been reborn. And I've kind of come to this hypothesis, as I've been watching things over the last 10 years, particularly reach kind of a fever pitch with the splintering and turning everything into an identity, identifying yourself by your illness, by your diet, by your politics, right? All of that we're doing. It seems that there is almost a deeply wired need for humans to have this greater sense of meaning. And in the absence of what we collectively used to have, our church, and, the US is largely, in many places, a secular culture now. I almost wonder if, in the absence of that structure, that people are seeking it elsewhere and becoming drawn into Instagram gurus as their, leaders. It's a weird.
Their pastor, their priest.
Right. They're food popes. Just because it has so much of that, it has so many similar themes. There's the fervor, there's the conviction, there's the dogma. And if there is someone who is in the fold, who breaks away, who changes their opinion, Sarah Ballantyne is a great example. With paleo, autoimmune paleo, and in the last couple of years, she's really pulled away from that and has been critical of some of the things that she helped popularize, and her community ripped her apart for it. And again, it's very similar to how in a tight-knit community, if you don't follow the rules of the sect, you are cast away. And this goes, of course, beyond organized religion. This is something very fundamental to human tribal behavior.
Our tribal instinct. And I noticed that with Sarah Ballantyne was a big one.
Yeah.
I noticed the change. I was gone in the middle. She was very dogmatic, but speaking of dogmatic, she was very dogmatic by a lot of things. And so I had trouble. So she was a person that had a great wealth of knowledge, but when she got really dogmatic in her thinking, I couldn't take it, because it's like let's go back to the nuances. There's that one way isn't the only way.
Right.
Like, even if you're vegan, there's lots of ways to be vegan. And I keep bringing that up because I like to use something on the outlier, like a vegan. There's lots of ways to be vegan. There's lots of ways to be keto. There's lots of ways to be paleo, Mediterranean. But when you get into that fold, and that's where I see the nuances go out the window, even with their tribal leaders, is that, well, here are the rules. You got to follow the rules or you're not it.
Right.
Like, how many times have you heard somebody say something, well, that's not keto. And it's corn oil. And now I'm not a big proponent of corn oil, but technically that's not, technically that's not going to affect you getting into ketosis or not. Is it healthy for you? That's a whole nother story.
Yeah. I mean, if it's, yes, exactly.
There's two parts to this. There's the health part, or vegan. It's like the plant-based crap versus fruits, vegetables, nuts, and beans. Like, when you did it, there wasn't all this processed food. And people would go, how did you do it? And it's like, well, because you ate real food. Like,
yeah, I mean, yeah, when I started, there was Morningstar Farms. That was it.
Yeah.
Morningstar Farms had been around since the 70s. And I had just started, I was probably 3 years in. I was vegetarian for 13 years. I tried so hard to be vegan, and after about 3 months, my body would just need cheese or eggs. And so I was never, quote, a good vegan. And this was this badge of shame that I very quietly carried. But Boca burgers came onto the scene, soy milk came onto the scene during that time, and I was eating a great deal of processed soy. Uh, which really ended up messing me up so bad. But this is the thing that we see too with all of these food fads, is when they initially start off, because they eliminate a lot of the commonly consumed processed foods. Initially, when people would go keto or start the Atkins diet in the 70s, especially, they were effectively eating an unprocessed diet. And so they were getting a lot of nutrients and feeling better because there were things that had been taken out and replaced with more wholesome foods. What I saw in the 90s and early 2000s, I was working in a health food store at the time, and people initially would come in and they're on this Atkins diet and they're feeling great and they've lost 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds. And oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then a couple years later, Atkins started making their Atkins bars. And there was the low carb spaghetti made with soy flour that started coming out. And the more the industry responds to the demand and creates the processed foods that people miss, but use it with, how do I want to say this? You'll need to edit this. As the industry begins to respond to the demand, they create hyper-processed foods that fit the label of Atkins friendly, low carb friendly, vegan, using super processed ingredients. So the macros look right. The ingredients are within the rules. Yet these are hyper palatable, hyper processed foods. And so people who jumped on the Atkins bandwagon 5, 6 years later, after they saw their friends and their family and all these people having great success at it, who had access to these hyper processed Atkins friendly foods, they would lose maybe 15, 20 pounds, and that's it. And then
Yeah.
they'd swell out. Same thing happened this time around. There was paleo. Paleo, by definition, unprocessed diet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 15 years later, we got paleo snack cakes, paleo this, paleo that, right? And paleo then became keto, and then keto became the invitation to create all of these, sugar, alcohol, sweetened
Oh,
keto
it's crazy.
nonsense stuff.
It's crazy. And for me, I'm always upfront is I never tolerated erythritol. And if
Mm.
you were a true keto back, 7, 8 years ago, you couldn't have the other sugar alcohols. It was erythritol. Well, I couldn't tolerate it. So that kicked all the processed junk food out. So I really got healthy by eating whole foods because that's all that
Yeah,
was left. That was
yeah.
all that was. You can't even bake yourself something with
Without the
some like
erythritol.
without the erythritol because monk fruit is so strong.
Mm.
You're everyone's like, well, just you're taking out a dry ingredient. So if you're trying to bake a cookie or cake or something, you can't take out a cup of a dry ingredient.
Right,
Like it just doesn't
right.
work.
Exactly.
So you're
Exactly.
stuck with pretty much whole foods. And I think, back in the day when there wasn't like even the vegan when you started, there wasn't a lot of processed food. So people ate
No.
more real foods. And I had a conversation recently with a family member. Oh, look at this plant-based butter. And I looked at her and go, that's nothing more than margarine. And she's looking at me like I'm nuts. And I'm like, that's
It's
nothing more.
plant-based. What do you mean?
It's
It's gotta
margarine.
be healthy.
It's
Comes from
margarine.
plant.
Like, and I'm like, I get it. And I'm one, when I work with people and I don't know if you're dairy free, don't start replacing cheeses and butters if you
With the
can't
VO
have them
life.
because
Yeah.
it's not now nut milk or soy milk, like depending on the processing of that, that's different. Like, because some people do, you need a little bit of something in your coffee, but I always say coconut milk and people freak out. They're like, it's got so much fat. And I'm like, it's probably the closest thing to a natural, unprocessed anything than the rest. The rest all need a lot of work to get there.
Right.
I hate coconut, so that's never going to end up in my coffee.
Some people really like it. I didn't
I
like
know
my coffee either.
it's probably well, I've just never loved coconut. I'm one of those weirdos, but no, and it's the nuances. It's like how do you get around it? Like you said, there's all this processed stuff that are now even in the vegan world and the low carb world, it's tricking them to think they're eating better.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all prey and susceptible to marketing, and we're all susceptible to our bias overriding our better judgment. Like that's just being human.
I
And
know.
these companies have insane marketing budgets with like behavior scientists who totally know how to hook us and reel us in. and like the odds are really stacked against you. You have to go out like mentally armed to the teeth in a grocery store to get through it without like having your emotions hijacked and coming home with the latest, oh gosh, what was it? Someone sent me a picture earlier this week of, oh, it was peanut butter and jelly like snack bars, but the jelly was this shellac on the top of
Oh,
peanut butter. Yeah, like just hideous, hideous snack cake thing. And but someone out there is going to be in the grocery store. They're either going to be hungry or they're having a bad day. And you look at that weird, it looks like a peanut butter jelly Kit Kat. Um,
okay.
and it's gonna trigger the nostalgia. It's gonna end up in your cart, right?
Oh, yeah.
And for shareholders, it's a short-term win. Whatever that product's probably not going to be around in 5 years, just like Lady Gaga Oreos are no longer on the
Oh,
shelf. It was there for a brief minute. It was hilarious and wrong.
oh no, I've seen like Barbie, like, what was it? It was Barbie Waterloo or something like of the sparkling
Oh,
water. And I'm like, what flavor is
oh,
Barbie?
yeah.
Like it's just, and it was something that would normally just be like sparkling water, nothing much in it. And I'm looking at it like, why?
Because
Why?
some little girl is gonna freak out, get so excited, and pester her mom until her mom says fine, and
But at least
throws
it's
it in the
sparkling
cart.
water. At least it's
Yeah,
sparkling water.
yeah.
But it's we're all into, following something, trying to get us back a little bit to nuances, but following something because it worked for, okay, worked for you, so I'm going to do it just like you.
You're human, I'm human. Why not? Why
Why
wouldn't it
not?
work?
Because we're not each other.
Yeah, yeah.
We
And
don't even live in the same time zone. Like,
it exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and it does make it, I know how frustrated people get because rules just make things so much easier and so much simpler. And we all have so many other things going on that if there could just be some food rules to follow, I would feel more confident. I would know what to do. And if there was, a skilled professional guiding me, then it would work, right?
mhm,
And not necessarily. The body is this gloriously, insanely complex ecosystem that is always changing and always adapting and always shifting. One thing that I think gets lost too with all the different dietary fads or things that do work for people, and part of the reason why I think that people who have been dogmatically carnivore are starting to do, blasphemous things like adding honey into their
mhm.
diet or
Oh
fruit.
no.
um, things like Sarah Ballantyne making the shift away from AIP. And for those who are still AIP advocates, Mickey Trescott and the others, they are adjusting AIP based on new research, based on new knowledge, based on now the 15 years or so of clinical experience that people have had implementing these diets to make it less rigid, not to get rid of all the seed spices, not to make it so restrictive, because that was by and large unfounded when you took the research, the theory, and applied it in real life. So we're seeing shifts there as
Mhm.
well. And I think one thing that does get lost when people find something and it works for them is we forget that we do live in this ever-changing ecosystem of a body, and the food that healed you may not necessarily be the food that sustains your health. There is a difference between a healing diet and a healthy diet.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that because that is the biggest thing that I see personally when I'm working with people or getting them out of that headspace
Yes.
because I went vegan or I went paleo, I went keto and I felt so good and it was healing and then I got stuck so I doubled down on it and I tripled
Yep.
down on it and I ketoed harder and I veganed harder and I didn't get
That's what
any
they tell you
better.
to do. That's
I
what they
didn't
tell
get
you to
any
do.
better. And so it must be the diet. It can't it must be something wrong with me because it had to have worked. Like it's just our bodies are changing and have different needs at different times.
Yeah,
Or I
exactly.
fell off and I went back and it didn't work. Well, because your body's not the same as it was when you did it the first time.
Yes. And particularly with these elimination diets like low FODMAP and AIP
Mhm.
and carnivore, when you stay there too long, because it works, you feel good. You feel like, oh, I found the thing that works for me. I can just, set it and forget it now. Many of these, well, firstly, low FODMAP and AIP were never intended to be lifestyle
No.
diets. They were intended to be, and the initial creators and advocates and proponents of these plans will tell you this, they were intended to be short-term dietary changes to provide relief and to ascertain which foods were problematic for you through a reintroduction phase.
Mhm.
When you severely restrict multiple different foods for such a long period of time, you can end up with dietary deficiencies that inhibit your body from healing, from reaching that next level. And when your response is to restrict further, what you actually double down on is your illness and your inability to heal.
Mhm. Well, I often hear I went carnivore and all my digestive and gut issues healed.
Yep.
And my thing is, no, you removed the offending foods. Did you work on healing your gut lining, diversifying your bacteria and doing that aspect, which you can do on a carnivore diet. It does require supplementation, but and then reintroduce stuff. And everyone looks at me who's like, no, because if I reintroduce it, I'll get sick again.
Then are you healed?
You know, it
Really? What does healing mean then?
I mean, an elimination diet is awesome to give your whole body the break to then
Yeah.
do the work. But I think we've, as a society, or as these diets become influencer pushed, and
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with influencers. I just want to put that out there, but they get pushed by people who don't understand the full concept that they weren't meant forever. They were meant as a stepping stone, then to do the healing work behind it.
Yeah.
Um, and the healing work is the work that always gets neglected, unfortunately.
I mean, for many people, it's a multi-year process. It's messy. It's not cut and dry. It's a lot of experimentation. It's a lot of and the healing process is incremental.
Mm-hmm.
It
It,
isn't it isn't a it isn't linear by any stretch of the imagination, and it isn't without setbacks. And sometimes you don't know why you have those setbacks, and there is no way to know. But our bodies are mysterious. As much
mm-hmm.
as we like to think we know so much about the human body, can I curse? Is that
Sure.
okay? We don't know shit. We
No.
don't. Particularly, like the science of nutrition is less than 150 years old. We didn't know that vitamins existed 150 years ago.
Mm-mm.
We still largely have no idea what the optimal amount of nutrients are for human health. We know how to avoid scurvy. We know how to avoid rickets.
Well,
We
think of
don't
it this
know.
way. We're just even learning how to prevent muscle deficiency. And
Gosh,
we've
yeah,
had an RDA forever. And
yeah,
everybody thinks the RDA means recommended daily allowance when with protein, it's the bare minimum to prevent deficiencies. And people thought it was the maximum. Like
yeah.
people still think it's a maximum and they're like, oh, well, this is the latest trend. I'm like, no, this is actually the latest research. There's a difference.
Yes, yes, there is. Yeah. Oh, the RDA.
I know that I didn't even I dove into the RDA not too long ago and realized that there was actually originally an RDA even on carbohydrates, but nobody talks about it. It's something
Oh,
like 150 to 200 grams.
yeah, yeah. And we're overshooting that quite well. We can't really talk about that because all of our cheap subsidized food will need to be somewhat curtailed, and
Yeah,
that makes our GDP look less exciting than
painful.
last year. Mm-mm, not allowed, not allowed.
It's the nuances of that like diet. Okay, let's go back to like you just said that we're learning more stuff like the AIP. They've learned from clinical research in their clinics. Like not everything is going to be a
Right.
scientific published paper. I just want to
Right.
put that out there.
Yeah,
But
it's not realistic.
it from some of these health professionals implementing it, we're getting data out of that. And that shouldn't just be thrown away because you have people who say, well, it's not a randomized controlled trial, so it's meaningless. I won't mention names, but it is meaningful if you've seen 1,000, 2,000 people and you can curtail something based on the results of that. That's to me as valid as a randomized controlled trial that was done only on healthy people.
Yes, yes. And I mean, going to AIP specifically, it was, it was those early individuals, Rob Wolf, Sarah Ballantyne. I know there's an argument about who actually started AIP, but that's not I have zero interest in that.
Yeah.
Um, those early influencers who looked at the research and said, well, this appears to be inflammatory, this appears to be inflammatory, let's cut all these things out. And then it became popular and it was this, underground movement, but people started seeing results. After 10 years of this, someone in the research field said, hey, this is an interesting signal we're seeing. Let's see if the research backs it up. And then there was clinical research done, which did in fact validate that autoimmune paleo can be helpful for bowel disorders and autoimmunity. So you can't wait. Sometimes the clinical research comes from the evidence that people see in private practice, that people see in multiple areas,
Mm-hmm.
multiple different areas of the world, and that creates a signal that then a researcher wants to explore further. We can't expect people locked in a lab asking questions to know all the questions that need to be asked.
Yeah.
Sometimes it has to come from the people, it has to come from these movements to get enough momentum and enough popularity that then we can take a look at research and, negate or confirm it. Same thing with acupuncture, right?
Oh yeah.
Acupuncture is backed by clinical research. So is EFT. So is chiropractic. All of these things were considered witchcraft, nonsense, snake oil at some point in time within the last 100 years.
Absolutely. No, it's true. And that's where we like to take a step back and kind of pack science together with ancestral wisdom
Yes.
and make them collide because saying what your grandparents did, your great grandparents did, oh, it was bad because science said this new stuff is better, but they lived a lot healthier than we do. That's what common sense has to come in as well, which, sometimes we forget all about common sense. You're telling me that this that we've eaten for thousands of years is bad, but this new processed thing in a lab is going to be healthier. Like, that goes back to the saying we're the only people smart enough to make our own food and stupid enough to actually eat it.
Oh my gosh. I have not heard that, but that is hilarious.
It's one of those we got to think about it, and I think there's a time and a place, like on a special occasion, whatever you want to eat, but we're going into scary territory as a society, and our health is just declining more and more and more the more we try to manipulate the food we're eating.
Yeah, Soylent Green isn't turning out so well.
I ain't eating you. Sorry. Yeah, no, it's not. It's crazy, but yeah, it's the little things like that. So when you work with people, or because you've worked with people over the years, how do you explain to them in general that there's this this is the guidelines, but you have something over here that we need to tweak this or tweak that. Like, how do we, as practitioners, I mean, maybe this is more for me. How do we, as practitioners, open people's eyes that they do need to tweak it specifically for themselves to get the most out of whatever they're doing? And if it's not working, it's okay. move on to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. When I'm having that conversation, I always like to remind the person that whoever created those rules didn't know them and wasn't thinking about this specific person, right? Either they were looking at research, which is all theoretical, or they are advocating what worked for them and they are not you. And, you know, I work a lot with digestive dysfunction. And so low FODMAP is,
Mhm.
comes up more frequently than autoimmune paleo for me at this point in time. So, with low FODMAP, I explain to them, okay, so the idea is there are fibers which are fermentable in the gut, and this is what creates the symptoms. Not everybody is sensitive to all of these different kinds of fibers. Not everyone is sensitive to all of the foods within a certain category of fermentable fibers, like the F or the O or the P
Mhm.
or whatever, right? And so when we start, for 2 up to 4 weeks, we're going to take out as many of these as we can. If you already know within this group that there are some items which for sure do not aggravate your symptoms, and there are foods you love. Let's keep them in and, double check that, right? But we'll start with the most extensive elimination, and then we are not going to stay there long because one, it's not necessary, and two, the longer you stay there, the more likely you are to get stuck because the gut microbiome can change
Mhm.
and prohibit you from eating these foods. But very, very, very rarely do I just do a low FODMAP diet without other interventions to support the gut. Um, and then we start bringing things in and we start trying. And I remind them your personalized low FODMAP diet, whatever ends up working for you long term, is not going to be like the person I spoke to yesterday. It's tailored to you. And that's why I think also why people come to see practitioners like you and I, because they want something that works for them.
Yeah. And they're tired of trying everything in it not working.
Exactly. And if you want something that works for you, you have to be willing to throw away the rule book that said you can't eat this, you can't eat that, only eat this.
Mhm.
Because any book that's been published, anybody who's talking to a camera on Instagram, that book is not written specifically for you. That person is speaking to a camera. They're not speaking directly to you. They don't know you. They cannot know what is best for you. When someone finds out what I do and I say, "Oh, I've got anemia. What should I do?" Or, "Oh, I've got this. What should I do?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know you well enough to make any kind of advice. I would need to know what your dietary status is, how your absorption is, if we're discussing anemia, why do you have anemia? Do you have gut
Exactly.
bleeding? Like, we can't it's not as simple as, well, try liver."
And it's crazy that you say that because it's true. And that's what they say. Someone says, I have X, and they're like, well, then you have to do this. But what's causing X?
Right, right.
There's certain things that it could be a multiple outside influences that are affecting X that we need to get to.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and that's why some people, I think that if you've tried every diet, and this is for the people out there, if you've tried every diet and it didn't work and it should have worked, maybe you do need somebody who can figure out what's going on because our medical system doesn't dive that deep. Where,
Right.
you know, certain practitioners have tools that will dig deeper
Yes.
and,
Yes.
and try to at least find that root cause.
So many times I have had people in my office and they've been like, "I tried this and it didn't work. Everybody lost weight but me." Or, everything I do, I'm trying to lose weight and it's not working. I don't know why. And it turns out that whatever dietary plan they're on, that they picked up from a book or they picked up from whatever, contains a food that they have a sensitivity to. And the resultant inflammation and aggravation that's happening, the immune response that's happening from the body, is inhibiting them from losing weight. And then
Exactly.
as soon as you transition that food out of their diet, like boom, 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 the weight starts to come off.
It's like it's especially big in like grain free because then they all of a
Yes.
sudden go to almond flour. Well, you might not have had any problems having a handful of almonds every few days. You're eating way more than that when you start turning it into a flour. So it reacts in your body completely differently all of a sudden because it's in the abundance.
Yes, yes. Our ancestors did not eat all of the almonds on the tree all at once.
Exactly. I mean, we all like a good baked good every now and then, but you have to be
But
realistic with what you're doing. Like I have, I don't know, coconut flour because we'll eat a whole coconut. It's probably not as condensed as almond flour,
yeah,
um, or any nut flour for that matter. It's just we've got to look at the, and also you were meant to have like a little bit. So if you bake something, have a little bit. I always tell people it's like it's all in the dose. The poison's in the dose.
exactly.
They'll talk about all the talk about the different sweeteners and stuff, and it's like, yeah, the poison truly is in the dose, but are you having one every 6 months? Or are you having five a day? Like,
Yeah. 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 And all those little whatever approved treats that the industry creates for us to satisfy our cravings also keeps us attached to the cravings. It keeps the craving alive. And if cravings are something that you struggle with, and emotional eating is something you struggle with, the dietary approved substitute will not help you break free from that. It's really important to find non-food substitutes wherever possible to really have a broad diversity of coping skills and a broad diversity of ways to reward and treat yourself. It's not to say that it's bad or wrong to use food as a celebration, as a treat, as a comfort, because I mean, that's, I think, denying your humanity.
mhm.
For as long as we have been, we have celebrated over a good meal because it meant that we got to live another day.
Mhm.
You cannot divorce celebration and reward from food. However, we never want to put all our eggs in one basket, right? We want to have a diverse set of coping skills available because if food is your only resource to turn to for emotions, it will be very, very difficult to maintain your health over the years. We
Oh,
just do not have an environment that permits that to happen.
absolutely. It is. We have gone to food too much for our coping mechanisms rather than sitting in our feelings, even, which
Mhm.
is a big one. Like, we got to remember we're all one person. So our feelings affect our health as well, our
Absolutely.
emotions, and learning how to deal with them outside of food that's already putting you at a disadvantage because you're eating junk food. We need to learn that. Maybe it's, going outside. Sometimes it's just being, it's okay to not feel okay sometimes.
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
something too, I think we've forgotten, right? Like there's this idea that we shouldn't ever be unhappy, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness somehow got morphed into life, liberty, and the right to be happy all of the time. And if you're going to be alive for any length of time, like that's not, it's not a thing. It can't happen. Life is chaotic. It is
it's
chaos.
it's crazy. It's
It
chaotic
is.
and it's okay to feel it. Like, and I think that
Absolutely.
when we get so separated is when we create the problems. We get
Yes.
separated from those feelings. We're looking to mask them, hide them, do what, but sometimes if we just live in them, they last a few moments and then they're gone.
Yeah. The only way out is through.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing with our food is the only way out is through is you're not going to make those changes unless you make those changes and move forward through it and be okay with changing. It's not one way and that's a big one and um for me to teach everybody is that there is no one right way. It's whatever's working for you now.
That's all it is. So, well, thank you, Aimee. This has been a fabulous, fabulous conversation. I
I really
appreciate
enjoyed
your
it.
time. I know I enjoyed it. I can't wait. I have a feeling we'll be doing this again because I need
Yes.
some good experts on that I can bounce stuff off, and it's as much for me as others because we're all learning.
Yeah.
Um, and we all learn different ways. So I appreciate you taking the time. And can you tell everybody where people can find you?
Oh, certainly, certainly. If you enjoy the sound of my voice, you can hear me every week on Blasphemous Nutrition, which is available on nearly all of the podcast apps as well as Apple. And I am also at vibrancenutrition.com. That's VIBRANCE nutrition.com. That is the website for my private practice. And I am sort of on Instagram at Vibrance Nutrition, but not especially. I try and stay away from social media because I value my mental health.
Exactly. And you know what? Everybody tune into her podcast. I will link everything in the show notes because she was so gracious with her time today. And you're going to want to check out her podcast because it's been fabulous. I've been listening to it and binging it.
Oh, thanks.
But thank you so much for taking the time, and I will see you all later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening in today. I hope you got some nuggets to take on your health journey. Remember, this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes. No medical advice is being given. By listening to this podcast, you agree to the full disclaimer, which is linked in the show notes. If you found this podcast helpful, could you take 30 seconds and leave a review? Your feedback means the world to me, and it helps others discover my show. Once again, thank you for being part of my community. Until next time, have a blessed day.